Now, if you've ever wondered what happens when military bureaucracy meets cosmic-level stupidity, let me tell you about Lieutenant Nia Walsh. Position 96th plus 1 out of 96th plus 1 graduates from the Terran Military Academy. Dead last. The kind of ranking that makes drill sergeants weep and career counselors suddenly develop mysterious scheduling conflicts. But here's the thing about being last. And oh, the irony here will make your head spin faster than a malfunctioning gravity generator. Sometimes the universe has a twisted sense of humor about who it chooses to save everyone's collective behind. The Galactic Defense Coalition headquarters buzzed with the usual pre-mission chaos. Picture a massive space station that looks like someone crossed a shopping mall with a military base, then painted it in that particular shade of beige that screams government efficiency. Alien species from across 12 star systems mingled in the corridors, each one absolutely convinced they were the pinnacle of military evolution. And then there were the humans, 3 months into their probationary membership, because apparently saving your own planet from extinction only gets you provisional status in this cosmic boys' club. Humanity was still treated like the new kid who showed up to school wearing hand-me-downs and carrying lunch in a paper bag. Nia stood at attention in Conference Room Delta 9, watching as General Morthak, of Orthani, whose species resembled what might happen if you crossed a rhinoceros with a particularly pompous philosophy professor, gestured dismissively at the holographic mission briefings floating before them. "The Outer Rim Patrol assignments," Morthak rumbled, his voice carrying the kind of authority that comes from never having been wrong about anything, ever, in the history of the universe, at least according to him. "Sectors Epsilon through Lambda require experienced commanders. Admiral Cortex, take your finest." The Admiral, a towering figure whose blue-scaled hide gleamed under the artificial lights, nodded with the kind of grave dignity usually reserved for funeral directors and tax auditors. "My pleasure, General. The Corvani Third Fleet stands ready." "Excellent. Commander Ulvani, the mid-rim defensive positions are yours." Ulvani, whose species looked like elegant praying mantises who'd discovered haute couture, clicked her mandibles in what passed for acknowledgement among her kind. "The Zilithian strike squadrons will hold the line." And then, because the universe apparently has a subscription to Dramatic Irony Monthly, all eyes turned to the humans, all 3 of them, standing there like they'd been called to the principal's office for a crime they didn't commit, but probably would have if they'd thought of it first. "Ah, yes," Morthak said, and you could practically hear the air quotes around his next words. "Our newest associates." Lieutenant Gavrin, who had the misfortune of being the senior human present, a distinction roughly equivalent to being the tallest blade of grass in a very short field, stepped forward. "Sir, Lieutenant Nia has completed her tactical certifications and—" "Has she now?" Morthak's laugh was the kind that makes small children hide behind their parents and causes houseplants to wilt. Position 96th plus 1, wasn't it? Quite an achievement. Now, here's where most people would expect our protagonist to deliver some stirring speech about potential and heart, and never giving up on your dreams. Instead, Nia just stood there with the kind of expression usually seen on people watching paint dry in slow motion. Because she'd learned something valuable during her time at the bottom of every ranking list, evaluation score, and bathroom cleaning roster. Sometimes the best response to cosmic-level condescension is to just wait. "There is," Morthak continued, clearly warming to his favorite topic, himself, "a suitable assignment for our uniquely qualified lieutenant." The hologram shifted, displaying a peaceful sector of space that looked about as threatening as a retirement community's shuffleboard tournament. Green dots indicated friendly outposts, blue lines showed shipping lanes, and absolutely nothing suggested any possibility of excitement, danger, or career advancement. Sector Mu-9, perimeter monitoring, quite safe. Morthak's smile could have been used to advertise dental products, if those dental products were designed to inspire existential dread. Perfect for someone with limited capabilities. And, he added, as if the universe hadn't finished laughing at humanity quite yet, you'll be accompanied by a Nexari youth squadron. Consider it a cultural exchange program. This is where things get interesting, because if you know anything about the Nexari, and most beings with functioning survival instincts made it their business to know about the Nexari, calling them a youth squadron is like calling a pack of teenage velociraptors a petting zoo experience. The Nexari were what happened when evolution decided that the galaxy needed a species that could bench press a small moon, had reflexes that made professional athletes look like they were moving through molasses, and considered extreme violence to be a legitimate form of artistic expression. Their idea of a lullaby typically involved detailed descriptions of glorious battles, and their children's toys were usually weapons that could cut through starship hulls. And their cubs, because that's what Nexari young were called, and if you had any sense of self-preservation, you called them that with the appropriate mixture of respect and pants-wetting terror, weren't exactly known for their patience with species they considered soft. The Nexari young are eager to prove themselves, Admiral Corthex noted, in the tone of voice typically reserved for discussing active volcanoes or, particularly, aggressive tax policies. Perhaps human flexibility will complement their enthusiasm. Translation: maybe the squishy humans can keep the murder puppies from accidentally starting an interstellar incident. It was the kind of logic that made perfect sense to military planners and absolutely no sense to anyone who had to actually implement it. Nia glanced at the mission parameters scrolling past on her personal display. Babysit 4 Nexari cubs. Monitor empty space for threats that definitely wouldn't materialize. Try not to become the galaxy's first case of death by cosmic boredom. Understood, sir, she said, because what else do you say when you've just been assigned the military equivalent of watching paint dry? Except the paint has teeth and a cultural tradition of settling disputes through ritual combat. Dismissed. Morthak waved them away with the kind of gesture usually reserved for shooing away particularly persistent insects. Try not to embarrass the species. As the meeting broke up, Nia caught the tail end of conversations that weren't meant for human ears. Comments about keeping the children busy, and, at least if something goes wrong, it's only humans. The kind of casual dismissal that would have been insulting if it weren't so perfectly, beautifully wrong. Because here's the thing about underestimating people, and this is where that twisted cosmic sense of humor really starts to show. The universe has a nasty habit of making you regret it in the most spectacular ways possible. An hour later, Nia found herself in Docking Bay 12, staring at what could only be described as the result of a genetic experiment between a grizzly bear, a professional wrestler, and a creature from humanity's collective nightmares. Except there were 4 of them. They were technically still juveniles, and they were all looking at her with the kind of expression usually seen on predators sizing up their next meal. "You are the human," said the largest one, and even his voice sounded like it could bench press a small vehicle. This was Corveth, according to her briefing files, leader of their pack, and already standing nearly 2 meters tall despite being roughly equivalent to a 16-year-old human. "I am," Nia replied, employing the time-tested military strategy of stating the obvious and hoping for the best. "We were told," said the only female in the group, Nailith, whose idea of casual conversation apparently involved constantly checking the sharpness of her claws, "that humans are weak." "We were told," added Vorthak, the youngest at what appeared to be the Nexari equivalent of 14, "that you break easily." "We were told," concluded Zephyra, whose eyes held the kind of intelligence that made you wonder if she was calculating the most efficient way to dismantle you piece by piece, "that this assignment is punishment." Nia looked at them for a long moment, these four creatures who could probably tear apart a small spacecraft, with their bare hands, who had been raised in a culture where diplomacy was just what you called it when you only broke one bone instead of two, and who were clearly as thrilled about this assignment as she was. "Well," she said finally, "they got 3 out of 4 right. Not bad for military intelligence." Corveth's ears twitched, the Nexari equivalent of a raised eyebrow. "Which one was wrong?" "Guess we'll find out." And with that profound exchange of military wisdom, they boarded their assigned vessel, a light patrol craft that looked like it had been designed by someone whose primary design philosophy was aggressively mediocre, and launched into what everyone assumed would be the most boring assignment in the history of interstellar warfare. Everyone, as it turned out, was spectacularly wrong. But that's the thing about the universe's sense of humor. It doesn't just set up the punchline. It makes sure everyone's paying attention when it delivers it. You know how sometimes you're having a perfectly mundane day? Maybe you're doing something mind-numbingly routine, like monitoring empty space for threats that absolutely, positively will not materialize. And then the universe decides to remind you that it has a PhD in chaos theory and a minor in making your life complicated? Welcome to Hour 6 of what was supposed to be the most boring patrol in galactic history. Nia sat in the pilot's chair of the patrol vessel Wanderer, watching sensor readings that had remained stubbornly peaceful for the better part of a standard day. Behind her, the 4 Nexari cubs had arranged themselves in what she was beginning to recognize as their natural formation. Corveth, standing like a statue, carved from barely contained violence. Nailith, sharpening already impossibly sharp claws on a piece of metal that had probably started life as part of the ship's hull. Vorthak, practicing what appeared to be combat meditation, but looked more like a predator preparing to pounce, and Zephyra, studying tactical displays with the intensity of a scholar deciphering ancient texts. "Contact," Zephyra announced suddenly, her voice carrying none of the excitement you might expect from someone who'd just spotted the first interesting thing to happen in 6 hours. Multiple signatures bearing 2 Mark 8. Nia's fingers danced across the console, pulling up the sensor data. What she saw made her stomach perform the kind of gymnastics routine usually reserved for Olympic competitions and bad cafeteria food. 12 ships. No, wait. 18. Actually, make that 23 and counting, because apparently today was the day the universe decided to throw subtlety out an airlock. "Those aren't on any registry," Nailith observed, and there was something in her voice now, a note of anticipation that suggested she was looking forward to whatever came next. "Unknown configuration," Vorthak added, his meditation apparently forgotten. "Weapons signatures. Significant." Corveth stepped closer to the display, and Nia could feel the temperature in the room seem to drop a few degrees. When a Nexari warrior started paying attention to something, the smart move was to pay attention too. "They're not here for the scenery," Nia muttered, fingers already moving to activate the comm system. "Coalition Command, this is Wanderer on perimeter patrol. We have multiple unknown contacts in Sector Mu-9. Request immediate static." The kind of electronic snow that meant either your communications array had decided to take an unscheduled vacation, or someone was jamming your signal with equipment that cost more than most planets' annual defense budgets. "Well," Naya said, employing humanity's greatest tactical asset, the ability to maintain a sense of humor in the face of imminent doom, "that's not ominous at all." She tried switching frequencies, boosting power, even routing through the backup arrays. Nothing but static, and the kind of electronic interference that suggested whoever these visitors were, they'd come prepared for party crashers. "The fleet," Zafira said quietly, her tactical mind already working through the implications. "If they can jam us here, they can jam everyone," Nia finished. "Coalition Command has no idea what's coming." And that's when the first explosion lit up their sensors. It wasn't close, maybe 15 minutes away at maximum burn, but it was big enough to register on their instruments from that distance. The kind of explosion that meant someone had just introduced a very large ship to the business end of some very serious weaponry. "Coalition signatures," Korveth reported, his voice carrying the flat tone that Nexari used when they were discussing something that had just become personal. 3 ships were 3 ships. More explosions followed, a cascade of light and energy that painted their sensor display in shades of disaster. Each flash represented hundreds, maybe thousands of lives snuffed out in the time it takes to blink. Nia felt something cold settle in her stomach. This wasn't a random raid or some territorial dispute between minor powers. This was coordinated, precise, and devastatingly effective. "They knew," she said, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. "They knew exactly where our ships would be, what routes they'd take, what their defensive capabilities were." "Inside information," Nalith agreed, her claws extending fully now. In Nexari body language, that was roughly equivalent to a human reaching for a weapon. "But who—" Vorthak started. "Later," Nia interrupted, her mind already shifting into crisis mode. "Right now, we need to figure out what we're going to do about it." The smart play, the regulation play, the kind of play that got you commendations and promotions and a nice quiet retirement, was to run. Get back to Coalition space, report what they'd seen, and let someone with more ships and bigger guns figure out what to do. Next, the problem with the smart play was that by the time they got back to Coalition space, there might not be any Coalition left to report to. "Options," Nia said, pulling up tactical displays and trying to ignore the fact that their little patrol craft was roughly as threatening to these unknown attackers as a particularly aggressive butterfly. "We could attempt to break through their perimeter," Korveth suggested. "Reach Coalition forces. Warn them." "Through 20+ enemy ships?" Nia shook her head. "We'd last about as long as it takes to say heroic sacrifice." "We could hide," Vorthak offered. "Wait for them to leave, then report." "And watch the entire Coalition fleet get picked apart while we're playing hide-and-seek," Nalith snarled. "That is not the way of warriors." "No," Nia said slowly, an idea beginning to form in the back of her mind. The kind of idea that would have made her instructors at the academy reach for their emergency medication. But there might be another way. She pulled up the sensor readings, studying the enemy formation with the intensity of someone whose life, and the lives of everyone she'd sworn to protect, depended on finding a weakness that probably didn't exist. "They're good," she said finally. "Too good. Everything about this attack is perfect. Timing, coordination, intelligence. It's like they've been planning this for months, maybe years." "Which means," Zafira prompted, "which means they're following a plan. And plans, no matter how perfect, have assumptions built into them." Nia's fingers flew across the controls, pulling up more data, cross-referencing energy signatures and ship configurations. They're assuming coalition forces will respond according to standard doctrine. Form defensive lines, mass their firepower, fight the kind of battle they've been trained for. But, Korveth asked, and there was something in his voice now, not quite respect, but maybe the beginning of interest. But what if we don't fight that kind of battle? Nia turned to face the four Nexari, seeing something in their eyes that hadn't been there before. What if we fight the kind of battle they haven't planned for? Elaborate, Nalith demanded. Nia pulled up a tactical map, highlighting the enemy positions and the scattered remains of coalition forces. They're hunting fleet formations, capital ships, things that fight like armies. But we're not an army. We're not even a proper patrol craft. We are prey, Vorthak said flatly. No, Nia smiled, and it wasn't a particularly nice smile. We're something much worse. We're a problem they didn't plan for. We're the variable that doesn't fit their equation. She began overlaying course projections, supply lines, communication nodes. They had to establish a forward base somewhere in this system to coordinate an attack this size. Had to have supply ships, command vessels, all the infrastructure you need to run a military operation. Infrastructure, that would be lightly defended, Zephyra said, catching on, because all their combat assets are engaged with the main fleet. Exactly. And if we could find it, if we could disrupt their coordination even for a few minutes, the coalition fleet might have a chance to regroup, Korveth finished. Hit back while they're confused. It was insane. It was suicidal. It was the kind of plan that would get you court-martialed if it failed and hailed as a genius if it worked. In other words, it was exactly the kind of plan you'd expect from someone who graduated last in her class because she couldn't stop thinking outside the box. There's just one problem, Vorthak pointed out. Finding their base in a system this size could take days. We don't have days. Nia was quiet for a long moment, studying the data streams and thinking about patterns, about the kind of logistics that made military operations possible. Then she pulled up a different display. Not tactical, but astronomical. We don't have to find it, she said quietly. We just have to make it find us. The four Nexari exchanged glances, the kind of look that predators share when they realize their prey might be more dangerous than expected. Explain, Nalith said. They're jamming communications, Nia began, her fingers already moving across the controls. But jamming isn't passive. It requires active transmission, constant adjustment, real-time coordination with the attacking forces. A command ship, Zephyra breathed. Something with enough processing power to coordinate the entire operation. And if we could locate that ship, track its transmissions, we could follow it home, Korveth said. And for the first time since they'd met, he looked at Nia with something that might have been approval. It was still insane. It was still probably suicidal. But now it was insane with a plan. And somehow that made all the difference. Strap in, Nia said, her hands dancing across the pilot controls. We're about to find out if the universe's sense of humor extends to making the impossible merely improbable. Behind her, 4 Nexari cubs settled into combat positions, their earlier skepticism replaced by the kind of focused intensity that their species was famous for. They still didn't entirely trust their human commander, but they were beginning to suspect that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't quite as harmless as everyone thought. The Wanderer turned away from the battle, slipping into the black between the stars, hunting for prey that didn't know it was being hunted. And in the depths of space, the real war was about to begin. Now, If you've ever tried to hunt something that's actively hunting you while simultaneously trying not to get vaporized by the crossfire of the largest space battle in recent galactic history, you'll understand why the next few hours were what experts in the field of military disasters like to call character building. The Wanderer drifted through the outer system like a ghost, with trust issues, passive sensors straining to pick up the electronic whispers that would lead them to their target. Nia had shut down everything non-essential. Life support was running on minimum. Artificial gravity was more of a polite suggestion than a firm rule, and the coffee maker had been sacrificed to the gods of power conservation. "Signal detected," Zephyra whispered, because apparently even space-born predators understood the value of not attracting attention when you're desperately outgunned. Bearing 31 Mark 6, consistent with command and control transmissions. "Distance?" Nia asked, her fingers hovering over the navigation controls. "Approximately 2 million kilometers, moving on intercept course with the main battle," which meant their quarry was staying close enough to coordinate the attack, but far enough away to avoid getting caught in the inevitable counterattack that would come when the coalition forces finally got their act together. Smart. Professional. The kind of tactical thinking that came from experience and planning. The kind of thinking that was about to run headfirst into the beautiful chaos of human improvisation. "Passive pursuit," Nia ordered, beginning the delicate process of stalking prey that could swat them out of existence without breaking stride. "Minimum power, maximum stealth. We're not hunters right now. We're shadows." For the next 2 hours, they played the galaxy's deadliest game of follow the leader, staying just close enough to track their target's movements while remaining far enough away to avoid detection. It was the kind of flying that required the pilot to think like a physicist, a strategist, and a magician all at the same time. Fortunately, graduating last in her class had given Nia plenty of practice at doing impossible things with inadequate resources. "Contact!" Corveth announced suddenly. Multiple ships, bearing dead ahead. The tactical display lit up with new signatures, not the sleek, deadly profiles of the attack fleet, but the bulkier, less elegant shapes of support vessels. Supply ships, communication arrays, mobile repair facilities. The logistical backbone that made military operations possible. And, in the center of it all, a single ship that was obviously running the show. It was larger than the others, but not ostentatiously so, bristling with communication arrays instead of weapons, designed for coordination rather than combat. "Command ship," Nalith confirmed, her predator instincts apparently extending to identifying military hierarchies. "That's our target." "Now comes the fun part," Nia said, and her tone suggested that her definition of fun might not align with most people's. "How do we get close enough to do some damage without getting turned into cosmic dust?" It was Vorthak who provided the answer, his youthful enthusiasm apparently undaunted by minor details like overwhelming enemy superiority. "We don't attack the command ship." "We don't?" Nia CT asked. "We attack everything else." And that, ladies and gentlemen, was the moment when a Nexari cub taught a human officer the fine art of thinking like a space-born predator. "Explain," Zephyra demanded. "Pack hunting," Vorthak said, his eyes bright with the kind of excitement that should have been terrifying but was somehow reassuring instead. "You don't bring down large prey by attacking it directly. You harass it, confuse it, make it panic. Then, when it makes a mistake, you go for the throat," Corveth finished, and his smile was the kind that would have given nightmares to creatures that didn't have nightmares. Nia stared at them for a moment, These 4 young warriors who had just handed her a tactical doctrine that no military academy in the galaxy would have taught because it was too insane, too unpredictable, too human. Guerrilla warfare, she breathed. Hit and run tactics. Make them chase shadows while we pick apart their support structure. Can it work? Nalith asked. Nia looked at the display, calculating odds and angles, and the 1,000 variables that separated brilliant improvisation from spectacular suicide. Then she thought about the coalition fleet, probably fighting for its life, while their commanders tried to figure out how their perfectly planned defenses had been turned into Swiss cheese. Only one way to find out, she said, and began plotting an attack run that would have made her academy instructors reach for their emergency medication. The first target was a supply tender, wallowing through space with all the grace of a drunken asteroid. It was lightly armed, minimally shielded, and absolutely critical to keeping the attack fleet operational. It was also completely unprepared for a single patrol craft to come screaming out of the dark like a bat from the depths of space hell. The Wanderer's weapons weren't much, a pair of light particle cannons that were designed more for discouraging pirates than engaging military targets. But when you hit an unarmored supply ship in exactly the right spot, even light weapons can cause disproportionate amounts of chaos. The tender's cargo bay erupted in a chain reaction of secondary explosions that lit up the surrounding space like a very expensive fireworks display. Fuel, ammunition, spare parts, everything the attack fleet needed to keep fighting, went up in flames. Target destroyed, Corveth reported with satisfaction. Now we run, Nia said, throwing the Wanderer into a series of evasive maneuvers that would have impressed a drunken acrobat. Because, in about 30 seconds, the space around them erupted with incoming fire as the escort vessels scrambled to respond to the unexpected attack. Energy beams lashed out like angry serpents, searching for the ghost that had dared to strike at their charges. But the Wanderer was already gone, sliding back into the dark between the stars like a shadow returning home. Phase 1 complete, Nia announced. How are we feeling about Phase 2? What is Phase 2? Zafira asked. We do it again. And they did. Over the next hour, they struck at supply ships, communication relays, repair facilities, anything that looked important and couldn't shoot back effectively. Each attack was swift, precise, and absolutely devastating to enemy logistics. More importantly, each attack sent the same message. You are not safe. Your perfect plan has a flaw. Something is out here in the dark, and it's hunting you. Enemy response patterns are becoming predictable, Nalith observed, as they prepared for their 6th hit-and-run attack. They're sending escort vessels to investigate each strike. Pulling them away from the main battle, Vorthak added, weakening their combat formations. Which means the coalition fleet should be getting some breathing room, Nia said. But we've got a bigger problem. She pulled up the tactical display, showing the command ship and its remaining escorts. They're getting smart, tightening their formation, increasing patrols. We're running out of easy targets. And? Corveth prompted. And pretty soon, they're going to figure out that all these attacks are coming from the same source. When that happens, they'll stop reacting and start hunting. As if summoned by her words, the comm system suddenly crackled to life. Not with static, but with an actual voice. Deep, authoritative, and speaking perfect galactic standard. Unknown vessel, the voice said, you have caused sufficient disruption. Surrender now, and you will be treated according to the conventions of war. Nia looked at the 4 Nexari, seeing her own thoughts reflected in their expressions. The enemy was talking to them, which meant they'd been identified, tracked, and were probably about to become the center of a lot of unwanted attention. "This is Commander Ulvani of the Coalition Defense Force," the voice continued, and Nia felt her blood turn to ice water. "I repeat, surrender immediately." "That's impossible," Zafira whispered. "Ulvani is Coalition Command. She should be with the main fleet. Unless she wasn't. Unless the reason the enemy had perfect intelligence about Coalition movements and defenses was because someone was feeding it to them directly." "The traitor," Nia breathed. "It's not just someone passing information. It's someone in active command, coordinating the attack from the inside." The implications hit her like a physical blow. The Coalition wasn't just fighting an external enemy, they were fighting their own commanders. Every defensive position, every tactical decision, every desperate maneuver was being reported directly to the enemy in real time. "We have to warn them," Vorthak said. "Warn them how?" Nalith snarled. "Communications are still jammed. Even if we could get through, who do we tell? How do we know who else is compromised?" It was Korveth who provided the answer, his tactical mind cutting through the complexity to find the essential truth. "We don't warn them. We prove it." "How?" Nia asked. "We make the traitor reveal herself." And that, right there, was the moment when 4 Nexari cubs and 1 supposedly incompetent human officer decided to take on not just an enemy fleet, but the corruption that was eating the Coalition from within. It was still insane. It was still, probably, suicidal. But now, it was insane with a purpose, and that made it the most dangerous kind of crazy in the universe. "Signal the command ship," Nia said, her fingers moving across the controls with steady precision. "Tell Commander Ulvani that we're prepared to discuss terms." "Are we surrendering?" Vorthak asked. Nia's smile was sharp enough to cut space-time. "We're setting a trap. Because if there's one thing humans excel at, it's turning their greatest weaknesses into their most devastating weapons. And right now, being underestimated was about to become their secret advantage. The hunt was about to become the hunted. You know what they say about the best-laid plans of mice and military commanders? They usually work right up until the moment someone decides to throw the rulebook out an airlock and start making things up as they go along. And if you've ever wondered what happens when the supposedly worst graduate in military history gets creative with the laws of physics and interspecies diplomacy, well, buckle up." "Incoming transmission from the command vessel," Zafira reported, her voice carefully neutral. "They're responding to our surrender request." "On screen," Nia ordered, and the main display flickered to life, revealing the familiar angular features of Commander Ulvani. Except now, instead of the dignified authority figure they'd known from Coalition briefings, she looked like someone who'd been caught with her hand in the cookie jar and was trying to convince everyone it was actually a medical examination. "Unknown vessel," Ulvani said, her mandibles clicking in what might have been nervousness or might have been anticipation. "You will approach to docking range and prepare for boarding. Any deviation from direct approach will be considered hostile action." "Understood, Commander," Nia replied, injecting just enough defeated resignation into her voice to sell the performance. We're just a patrol ship. We didn't sign up for this." Behind her, Korveth made a sound that might have been a cough, but was probably Nexari laughter. The idea of their human commander being defeated by anything was apparently amusing to creatures who'd spent the last several hours watching her systematically dismantle a superior enemy force. "Maintaining course," Nia announced for Ulvani's benefit, while simultaneously sending a completely different set of commands to the ship's systems. Weapons powered down, shields at minimum. What she didn't mention was that minimum was a relative term, and that she'd been using the last hour to route power through systems that technically weren't supposed to handle that much energy, but probably wouldn't explode until after she needed them to work. "They're scanning us," Nalith reported. "Standard boarding preparation protocols." "Of course they are," Nia murmured, "because everything about this has been textbook perfect. Right up until it wasn't." The Wanderer approached the enemy command ship with all the innocent compliance of a lamb walking into a wolf's den. Except this particular lamb had spent its childhood learning how to make improvised explosives out of common household items, and the wolf was about to discover that sometimes the food chain has a sense of irony. "Docking clamps engaged," Vorthak announced. "They have us." "No," Nia said quietly, her fingers dancing across controls that were definitely not part of standard docking procedures. "We have them." You see, while everyone was focused on the dramatic space battle and the impressive logistics of coordinating a multi-fleet engagement, Nia had been thinking about something much simpler: information flow. Every military operation depends on command and control, on the ability to coordinate actions across vast distances in real time. And if you could disrupt that flow at exactly the right moment. "Boarding party preparing to enter," Zafira reported. 12 hostiles, full battle armor. "Let them come," Nia said. "But first," she activated a communication channel, broadcasting on Coalition emergency frequencies with every amp of power the ship could generate. "All Coalition forces, this is Lieutenant Nia Walsh aboard the patrol vessel Wanderer. Commander Ulvani is compromised. Repeat, Commander Ulvani is the source of intelligence leaks to hostile forces." The response was immediate and explosive, not just from the boarding party that was suddenly a lot more interested in getting aboard their ship quickly, but from the Coalition fleet itself. Even with jamming, an emergency broadcast at full power from this close range was getting through. "Warning all Coalition vessels," Nia continued, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had absolutely nothing left to lose. "Enemy command ship is located at coordinates 77 Mark 12. Traitor is aboard enemy vessel. Repeat, traitor is aboard enemy vessel." And that's when the real fireworks started. The boarding party hit the Wanderer's airlock like a force of nature armed with plasma rifles and bad intentions. They were professionals, well-trained, and absolutely not prepared for what they found waiting for them. 4 Nexari cubs, who had spent the last several hours watching their human commander turn impossible odds into tactical advantages, and who were now looking at a dozen enemy soldiers the way a pack of wolves might look at a picnic basket. The battle was brief, violent, and completely one-sided. When you're dealing with a species that considers excessive force to be redundant terminology, 12 soldiers in a confined space represent less of a threat and more of a target-rich environment. "Boarding party neutralized," Korveth reported with satisfaction. "Should we expect more?" "Not from them," Nia said, watching her tactical display light up with new contacts. "But from them?" She pointed to the swarm of Coalition vessels that were suddenly converging on their position, like angry wasps whose nest had just been kicked. The enemy command ship was trying to disengage, its engines flaring to life as it attempted to break away from what had suddenly become a very unhealthy location. But the Wanderer's docking clamps were still attached, and Nia had made some creative modifications to the release mechanisms. "They're stuck to us," Nalith observed. "And we're stuck to them," Vorthak added. "Which means," Zafira concluded, with the kind of tactical insight that made Nexari such formidable warriors, "when the Coalition fleet opens fire." "We're all going to have a very bad day," Nia finished. "Unless—" She pulled up the ship's internal schematics, calculating power flows and structural weak points with the desperate creativity of someone whose life depended on finding a solution that probably didn't exist. "Unless what?" Korveth demanded. "Unless we don't give them a target worth shooting at." What Nia did next would have gotten her expelled from the academy if she'd tried it during simulations. It violated about 18 different safety protocols, ignored at least 12 regulations governing the operation of spacecraft in combat situations, and required the kind of precise timing that would have challenged a professional gambler. She overloaded the Wanderer's power core. Not enough to cause an explosion. That would have killed everyone aboard both ships and defeated the purpose of the exercise. But enough to create an electromagnetic pulse that would fry every electronic system within a 50-kilometer radius, including the command ship's engines, weapons, life support, and, most importantly, its communication arrays. "Pulse in 30 seconds, Nia announced. "Everyone brace for emergency power loss." "Will this work?" Nalith asked. "Ask me in 30 seconds. The pulse hit like the fist of an angry god, washing over both vessels in a wave of electromagnetic fury that turned sophisticated military hardware into very expensive paperweights. Emergency lighting flickered on aboard the Wanderer, casting everything in an eerie red glow. But more importantly, the command ship was now dead in space, unable to coordinate the enemy fleet, unable to communicate with its forces, and unable to do anything except drift helplessly while coalition vessels closed in from all directions. "All systems down," Zafira reported. "Theirs and ours." "Emergency power only," Vorthak added. "Life support holding." "Communications?" Nia asked. "Working on backup power," Korveth said. "Should have limited range in a few minutes." And when the communications came back online, the first thing they heard was General Morthak's voice, broadcasting on Coalition command frequencies with the kind of authority that suggested he was having a very bad day and wanted everyone to know about it. All units, this is Coalition command. We have confirmation of sabotage at the highest levels. Repeat, we have been compromised from within. Adapt your tactical patterns. Assume all previous operational security has been breached. Which was when the tide of battle finally turned. Without inside information, without perfect intelligence about Coalition defensive measures, without the ability to coordinate their scattered forces, the enemy fleet suddenly found itself fighting the kind of battle they hadn't planned for. The Coalition forces, finally freed from the handicap of fighting with traitors in their command structure, began to press their numerical advantages. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't clean, but it was effective. "Coalition vessels closing on our position," Nalith reported as their sensors came back online. "They're requesting permission to board." "Grant it," Nia said. "But first," she activated the ship's external communications array and sent a signal to the dead command vessel still clamped to their hull. "Commander Ulvani, this is Lieutenant Nia Walsh. You are under arrest for treason, sabotage, and collaboration with hostile forces. Surrender now and you will be treated according to military law." The response came not through the communication system, but through the docking tube that connected their ships. Ulvani herself appeared, flanked by a pair of guards, her elegant features twisted with the kind of rage that comes from watching a perfect plan fall apart because of variables you never bothered to consider. "You!" she hissed, her mandibles clicking with fury. "You're nothing. A failure. The worst graduate in Academy history." "Yeah," Nia said calmly. "That's what everyone keeps telling me." "You have destroyed everything. Years of planning, months of coordination. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "Stopped a war," Nia replied. "Saved the Coalition fleet. Exposed a traitor." She paused, considering. Not bad for a failure. That's when Corveth stepped forward, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. When a Nexari warrior decides to make a statement, everyone pays attention. "Commander," he said, his voice carrying the formal cadence of ancient ritual, "you have dishonored yourself and betrayed those who trusted you. But this human—" He turned to face Nia, and what happened next would be talked about in Nexari warrior halls for generations to come. Corveth dropped to one knee and bowed his head. It doesn't sound like much, described in words, but in Nexari culture, the warrior's bow is reserved for those who have proven themselves in battle, who have demonstrated courage and tactical brilliance under fire, who have earned the right to lead not through rank or politics, but through action. It's the kind of honor that most Nexari never receive. The kind of respect that has to be earned with blood and victory, and the kind of desperate courage that turns impossible odds into tactical advantages. And it was being offered by a Nexari cub to a human officer who had graduated last in her class. Nalith was the next to bow, followed by Vorthak, and finally Zephyra. 4 young warriors, acknowledging a leader who had proven herself not through conventional success, but through the kind of creative tactical thinking that turns disasters into victories. "Rise," Nia said quietly, using the formal Nexari response because some moments deserve proper respect. "You honor me." "We honor a war leader," Corveth replied as they stood. "One who sees what others cannot, who fights battles others will not, who leads from the front, even when the front is nowhere anyone else wants to be." By the time coalition forces finished boarding both vessels, the situation was clear. Commander Ulvani was in custody, the enemy command structure was in shambles, and the coalition fleet was mopping up the remnants of what had been a perfectly coordinated attack. And at the center of it all was Lieutenant Nia Walsh, ranked 96th plus 1 out of 96th plus 1 graduates, standing with 4 Nexari cubs who had just declared her their chosen war leader. "Lieutenant Walsh," Admiral Corthex said when he finally arrived to survey the situation, "it seems we owe you an apology, and a commendation, and probably a promotion." "Thank you, sir," Nia replied, "but I'd like to make a request instead." "Name it." "I'd like to remain with my unit. These 4 have potential, and I think they could benefit from a little more unconventional training." The Admiral looked at the 4 Nexari cubs, who were standing at attention but somehow still managing to look like they were ready to take on the entire galaxy if their war leader asked them to. Then he looked at Nia, this supposedly failed officer who had just saved the entire coalition through sheer tactical creativity and complete disregard for conventional wisdom. "Granted," he said finally, "but, Lieutenant?" "Sir? Next time you want to save the galaxy, maybe give us a little warning first?" Nia smiled. "Where's the fun in that?" And somewhere in the background, the universe's cosmic sense of humor was probably having a good laugh about the whole thing. After all, it had just demonstrated one of its favorite principles. Sometimes the people everyone dismisses as failures are exactly the ones you want when failure isn't an option. Because at the end of the day, when everything is on the line and conventional wisdom has run out of answers, you don't want the best graduate or the highest-ranked officer or the most decorated commander. You want the one who graduated last because they couldn't stop thinking outside the box. You want the one everyone underestimated. You want Lieutenant Nia Walsh and her pack of Nexari cubs ready to take on impossible odds and turn them into tactical advantages. The galaxy, as it turned out, was in very good hands.